Okay, so we all know Google, right? But the story of how it all began, well, that's not just history. It's a really carefully crafted narrative. So how exactly is a tech giant's story told to the next generation? And maybe more importantly, what does that story choose to leave out?
And that brings us to this big question, because this is about way more than just one company. It's about how the giants that shape our world talk about themselves. How do you take a massive, complicated corporation and boil its history down into a simple, inspiring tale?
To figure this out, we're going to look at a really specific case study, a popular book by Anna Crowley Redding that's designed to explain the whole history of Google to teenagers.
All right, so first up, let's get into the story the book actually tells. It's that heroic, almost myth-like origin story of a global giant. It's a narrative a lot of us probably recognize.
You've probably heard this kind of story before. It all kicks off on a college campus, back in 1995. And our main characters? Two Stanford students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin.
And what were they trying to do? Well, they had this one wild idea, right? A real moonshot of an idea that sounds deceptively simple. To organize all of the world's information and make it available to everyone.
And what's crazy is how fast it all happened. I mean, they meet, they whip up this school project they called Backrub, and just a few years later, boom, they've launched Google. It's the classic Silicon Valley startup tale.
And this is where the story gets really good at painting a picture of these humble beginnings. The narrative just leans into how resourceful they were. We hear about borrowed hardware, discount toys, and get this, even a server built from Legos, all while working out of a friend's garage.
And this whole focus on being the scrappy underdog, that's a huge part of its charm. Like the review journal Voyeur points out, it makes this massive corporation feel relatable. It really speaks to young people who might have their own big ideas.
Okay, so that's the story we're told. But now, let's pull back the curtain and look at the method behind the myth. Why is the story told this way? Because, there's a real strategy at play here.
So when you break it all down like this, you start to see what this book is really all about. It's not just a history lesson. It's this super targeted piece of inspirational literature. I mean, look at the details. You've got an award-winning reporter to give it credibility, a publisher that confirms its market, and the audience dictates this breezy, accessible tone. And the goal? To get kids excited about tech and entrepreneurship.
And to really connect with those young readers, the author uses this, perfect three-step formula. First, you start with a little drama. Make the founders relatable by showing they didn't even like each other at first. Then, you show their personal struggles, like getting rejected over and over, or Sergey Brin coming to the US as a child refugee. And finally, this is the big one. You reframe failure. It's not the end, it's a key ingredient to success.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The author herself said her goal was to make this huge company feel less intimidating by, as she put it, peeling back the onion layers and focusing on the human stories at its core.
Okay, so this brings up a really crucial question. If you're building a story to be super inspirational, what do you have to leave on the cutting room floor?
And this right here really lays out the two sides of the coin. On one hand, you have the celebrated heroic narrative, all about innovation and shooting for the moon. But on the other, you have this much more complicated reality of market dominance, data collection, and all the challenges that come with that.
And of course, that's what happens when you make that trade-off. Some critics are going to point out that, hey, this picture of Google is maybe a little too positive. It's pretty much inevitable.
But you have to remember, that's a deliberate choice. To hit its inspirational goal for a young audience, this book has to be a model for innovation, not some deep critical history of corporate power.
And what does that mean in practice? Well, it means that all these really big, thorny topics that are central to what Google is today, things like data privacy, antitrust issues, and the ethics of ad targeting, they just don't make the cut, or at least they get seriously minimized.
Even the timeline is strategic, The story really zeroes in on those first 2 decades. That's Google's heroic phase, its rise, its disruption, all during a time when, let's be honest, public perception of Silicon Valley was just overwhelmingly positive.
So after looking at all this, what's the big takeaway? What should we remember?
It really just boils down to this. Every story has a storyteller, and every storyteller has a purpose. And understanding that purpose, in this case, inspiring young innovators, is the key to understanding the story itself, including what it decides to show you and what it leaves in the shadows.
And let's be clear, the book totally nails its goal. Look at what the school library journal said. It's an appealing and timely look and a good fit for STEAM-related reading lists. As an educational tool, it's a huge success.
But at the end of the day, looking at how this story is told leaves us with a really powerful question. A question you can ask about pretty much any story you come across. The next time you hear a narrative that really inspires you, just stop and ask yourself, to make me feel this way, what is this story asking me to forget?